Hello, and welcome to another episode of WCK's Interview with the DM series. Today, I'm interviewing someone who I've known for quite a bit, but only experienced as a fellow player. My name is Kristin, and I'm talking with Liam today. Liam has been leading a group of his coworkers through an adventure. I've seen Dungeons & Dragons used for team building purposes before, but I can only imagine that it can present some unique challenges, both within and without running the game. I'm excited to dive in, so welcome, Liam.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
When did you first hear about Dungeons & Dragons?
Well, probably when I was a kid. Like you always see representations of Dungeons and Dragons in various different movies,
Yeah.
but I didn't actually start taking part until COVID happened, when a few of my local friends wanted to start it up.
Yep. I feel like that's been a common thread for a lot of us, actually. So, for me, for example, it had always kind of piqued my curiosity when I was younger, and I felt like I didn't know anybody who played it. Although, looking back, I probably did, and I just didn't like wave my geek flag around enough for them to see it. Is it something that you had been interested in and just never gotten into, or just you heard about it and the opportunity didn't really present itself and the timing didn't line up and you weren't really interested until COVID happened?
It was more I never really considered it as something I would enjoy,
Hmm.
um, mainly because I've done some tabletop stuff before and never really been able to immerse myself fully.
Hmm.
Um, so when I actually got the opportunity to try, I wasn't doing much else with my time during lockdown, so I gave it a go, and I actually found not only did I immerse, I overly immersed, hyper focused, like learned so much so quickly. Like I really went down a rabbit hole within like the first few months starting.
I feel that. I feel personally attacked by that too. Well, so what was the first tabletop role playing game that you had kind of gotten into then that didn't pull you in as hard as D&D did?
It was Warhammer,
Hmm.
um, and I think, well, I was possibly too young to appreciate it fully as well, because a lot of rules, a lot of maths, and a lot of stuff going along, which I didn't quite understand. But well, and same with D&D when I first started. But being older, you have more patience and um, I guess determination to actually persevere with it.
Hmm. Um, so when you were playing that fell flat for you, and then you started um in COVID with D&D. Um First, just with Warhammer, do you remember what army you explored when you were playing?
Yes, I was playing Tyranids, which were the alien creatures, which I
Yeah.
liked mainly for the artistic side of it.
Hmm.
But I just thought they were cool. I
Yeah.
think I was like 11, so I thought, angry evil aliens. This sounds cool.
um do you think that Warhammer influences, or that aspect of it in particular, influences your games now, either how you play as a character or how you run and the things that you kind of sprinkle in as a game master?
Yes, definitely in terms of the combat, because Warhammer itself was built on D&D combat.
Hmm.
So uh, I didn't want it to be as chaotic. I also wanted it to be as epic.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm not saying like grand battles, but I'm talking if there's going to be a big fight, I want it to make it worthwhile to have
Hmm.
that time spent on that fight.
So when COVID happened and you had a group of friends who were interested in playing, did you start out as a player, or were you that person that was like, "All right, I'll learn how to figure out how to, present the game for all of us and I'll run it."
I started out as a player,
Mhm.
which I mean, my first character was horrendous. It was a It was a Goliath bard that had no
Ugh.
charisma, But I didn't know what I was doing. So
Mhm. So, the game that I met you in was not your first game then, but it was pretty quickly into you learning and knowing D&D, yeah?
yes, it was. I was still very fresh. So the other campaign I was playing was still. It was hit and miss on when we could meet up because this
Mhm,
was post like the third lockdown. So we played during the second and third lockdown, and then after that things started to go back to normal. So we stopped meeting up. So then I searched for another campaign.
mhm,
But during that campaign, we hadn't actually played that many sessions, maybe like twice a month or something.
mhm. Then Lismer was maybe your second character?
Lisbon would have been my second character, yeah.
Second character, nice. So when you were playing with your group of friends, that was online?
It was a mix.
Okay.
So at some point during lockdown, you were allowed to meet a certain amount of people in your
Yep.
bubble. Um, and when we got that opportunity, we were doing that.
Mhm,
But because the rules kept changing every week, we did move it online primarily. And then if we
right.
had the opportunity, we would then play in person. But we didn't have all the online tools or weren't aware of all the online tools.
Mhm.
So playing online was a bit more awkward. Um, so uh, at one point we had like the DM with an extra webcam on a bit of paper to draw out things and move people around, and like we were just working out what we could, uh,
Yep.
being ignorant of all the tools that are available.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it goes for a lot of us starting out too. So in your journey to behind the screen, from in front of it to behind, tell me about you personally getting started as a dungeon master. When was your first game that you ran on your own?
My first game that I ran on my own was during COVID, so the DM wanted a bit of a break,
Mhm,
as everyone does, because it's quite intense. Um, so I said I'd run a one shot, and it being the first one shot that I'd ever ran,
mhm.
it ended up being a free shot. so,
Yep.
um, and that was interesting. I thought I'd made the route quite obvious and clear, and made the riddle simple, and the players didn't agree apparently. So um, there was a massive learning curve in that, and you can't anticipate what the players are going to do. So now I've definitely modelled my world building based on that.
So with that, I know that there are a lot of game masters who have inspired me that have kind of plucked pieces from their style, how they run things, even different oh, I don't know what to call them, like systems where uh we've talked about it in different interviews where there's an X card, or you talk about beforehand there's this whole list that you run through of things that might be sensitive, things that you might be okay to touch upon. Whatever it is, there are definitely different systems, even homebrew rules. Like, for example, I forget which person it was that I took it from, but it was somebody in the server definitely, where they said, okay, if you use your action, it might have been Jason or Lee. If you use your action to drink your healing potion, you get all of the hit points that it could possibly allot instead of having to roll for it. I love that, right? You waste your entire action instead of using a bonus action. Fine. But is there anything that you have personally kind of cherry picked from other DMs that you put inside your games now?
So I've definitely taken the potion as an action for full
Mm-hmm.
healing. And there probably are, but I, because I'm still relatively new to the game, I'm not even sure if they're real rules or they're made up rules half the time.
Yep.
So, um, but the biggest one is rule of cool.
Yep.
I try to, as long as it's fair, like, or maybe a one off, then I tend to be lenient on that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, depending on the success of the role.
Sure.
Um, and then I also do things where if we're unsure on the ruling, I'll make a call at that point, and then we can maybe discuss it afterwards to actually find out how we want to proceed with different rules.
Yeah.
And then if we think it's unfair, then we'll make a rule there and then.
Yep.
So we're quite agile in our approach to ruling. So rather than me having a fixed set of rules, I have ones that make sense, and then I have ones that I make up as we go
Mhm.
to keep it fair, but also so everyone knows where they stand.
Yeah. That's a really important thing that I try to keep ever present in my brain on the rare occasions that I do run games, but I always give that piece of advice is that you can't be expected to remember everything. It's a lot of rules. And if even if you've been playing it for a long time, especially if you've been playing it for a long time, the rule set has changed and changed and changed and erratas happen. And so for you to be expected to have everything right here all the time is impractical. So doing your best in the moment and then figuring it out later. Sure, if you have somebody else at the table that wants to look it up while you continue on, but nobody likes to break immersion and wait 15 minutes while we look it up. Once we look it up, figure out how we want to rule it, have a discussion. It's just it's a really great thing to have that confidence to be able to just say like, hey, we're gonna figure it out in the moment, and then after we'll discuss it and figure out how we want to proceed from here on forward. Now into the meat of what I want to talk to you about is you have the unique experience of running games for your colleagues. I can imagine that that is really great, but I can also imagine that it could be kind of tricky. What is it like to run games for people at work? Did any of them have prior experience, or were they all fresh and you had to teach them all everything? Talk to me about it.
So only one of the guys actually he has loads of experience. Actually, he plays like 5 times a week. Um, but so everyone else were completely brand new, which was um, great because I could introduce them to it, teach them the rules, but also very intimidating because I've got to create a game where have the opportunity to learn, and it's still fun for them, but also the guy that plays a lot doesn't get bored.
All right. So, in running the games at work, is it something that you have brought maps and minis to? Do you use a virtual tabletop? Everybody brings their computers. Do you just use like D&D Beyond for a virtual character sheet? How do you have the setup at work?
So we use Roll20 and D&D Beyond,
Mm-hmm.
mainly because we can't always play in person because my company's international.
Sure.
So we've got, I've got someone in France playing, I've got someone in Italy playing, I've got a couple of guys in Bristol, which is another city miles away from me.
Mm-hmm.
So the opportunities for us to actually meet in person are slim. They can happen with different events, but it's still uh, slim. So we just use the online tools because then even in person it can be transferable.
Sure. Now, I remember when you were trying to sell this, like pitch it to your company to get it started. Um, since starting, have you seen any changes in those colleagues? Maybe their productivity, their attitude, camaraderie, anything like that? Has it been noticeable in upper levels of management even? What have you noticed, if anything, with those players since starting?
Definitely an improvement to the relationships between the different teams
Mm-hmm.
because uh, half come from one set of teams and the others comes from a different set of teams.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely helped with the collaboration there. Um, and you can see it in the productivity as well because when things are being requested, it's much easier to take a request from someone that you know
Sure.
than someone that you don't know. So that you can definitely see it's helping there.
Now, you've run games for obviously this group of people, but you've also run games for people that you don't work with. What would you say are the differences? Are there any differences between running games for people at work in a I'm gonna air quotes, work setting, work environment, or just, the general kind of atmosphere that those are that kind of particular people with those kind of relationships versus maybe a group of strangers or a group of friends. or even just kind of different acquaintances who don't have that working relationship? What's different about that?
I think the biggest difference is the comfort level between the people.
Mhm.
Because everyone knows each other in some capacity initially, the role play comes out a lot smoother because people feel a bit more comfortable.
Mhm.
But other than that, everything else is exactly the same. Scheduling issues, um, people being distracted. Uh, for example, because we tend to use our work laptops, they might get an email that distracts them for that split second, and you just notice it.
Yep.
Um, so I now have rules where a rule where you're not allowed to have Teams active, you're not allowed to have your emails open. It's all got
Mhm.
to be turned off because we're doing this in the evening after work as well. We're not doing it in work hours,
Sure.
so I don't think they should be working either. So
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole separate conversation, but yes. Put it on do not disturb and focus so you can be present and completely immersed as much as you can, right?
exactly.
Obviously there are other things like you have pets at your home. I've got pets and human pets at my home. Sometimes they cause distractions that you can't avoid anyway. Um, so overall, as an experience, how do you enjoy? I assume that you enjoy, but is it a love to hate? Do you find it challenging but rewarding to run games for these people?
I love it. The thing I love the most is the um the creation of the story that we're building together.
Hmm.
So I've got like an overarching plot, but how they get there, what defines the story going forward is all defined by what the players choose within the session as it
Hmm.
happens. And I also use a lot of downtime because we play once a month. So to allow the story to progress forward, I use um, downtime to fill in the gaps between sessions and also keep the guys immersed between
Hmm.
the sessions as well because it's a month, so it's difficult to keep the immersion otherwise.
Right. Did you guys have little like group chat that you keep active in between sessions?
Yeah, we got a group chat and everyone puts updates for what they want to do, and I'll tell them how they can achieve that in their downtime if it can be achieved in this amount of downtime or if it needs longer after the next session, things
Hmm.
like that.
So, besides maybe I'm going to call them human struggles with distraction, I actually talked about it, I think, with Joe. We were talking about it when we were comparing running games for kids um, online versus in person. And I said, online can present the same problems for exactly the reason you just said. A work email comes through. When I did that for a group of kids, there were a couple adults involved too, but I gave them their computers to pull up their virtual character sheets. And I'd look over and they're on another tab. Just looking up something else. If it was one of my kids, it's probably how to solve a Rubik's Cube, whatever it is, not focused on the game. Besides that kind of human distractibility, what kind of hurdles have you and maybe your players had to overcome in your games? Railroading, murder hobo tendencies, people who aren't team players, maybe those shy players who don't want to um, give role playing a shot and they just kind of stand back as a wallflower.
I think the biggest hurdle is the making them comfortable with role play and getting them used to role playing, which
Hmm.
everyone struggles with at first. But I think it's more difficult for them because these are for most of these guys, this is their very first character.
Hmm.
So I do try to give them all opportunities to have role play. However, sometimes forcing the matter isn't always going to help either.
Right.
Um, but what I'm giving everyone the opportunity for this year when we start up again is to roll new characters, so that
Oh.
now they've played a little while,
Hmm.
they know a bit more about the game, and they might have a better idea of what they would have fun with as a character.
Yeah. Interesting. So, if people take you up on that, do you see creating exits for those characters and then entrances for the new ones, or how do you envision that going?
So there would definitely be entrances for the new ones.
Mhm.
How the current characters. Exit is dependent on what the players themselves want.
Sure.
So some of them might want an epic death. Some of them might want to just go and do their thing, you know?
Yep.
I'm going to give them the option to have the choice. So then at least they feel like they're leaving on good grounds either way.
Continuing on with the same story, though.
Yes, continuing the same story.
So, is this, I'm assuming, then a homebrew campaign?
Oh yeah, 100% homebrew.
Okay. Talk to me about your world for a second. What's going on in the world that you've created?
So essentially, we're on a rather large island, so probably like the size of England,
Mhm.
and there's a there's minimal kingdoms on the island, but there's one big kingdom, and essentially everyone within this island are survivors of a massive dragon war from a
Mhm.
few thousand years ago. And as they were escaping, they brought with them a rather large dragon egg, and but they're not sure if this is an egg belonging to Tiamat or Bahamut,
Mhm.
and it's just sitting there under the city, just under guard. Um, and now it's been a certain amount of time, the egg's starting to awaken, dragons are starting to reappear, and the party themselves are on a quest to basically prevent the dragon war coming again.
Yeah, that sounds great. Do you get inspired by or pull maybe references, even imagery from pop culture, maybe films or TV shows? I know that for forever and ever and ever, right? D&D is very aligned with Lord of the Rings and even now Game of Thrones kind of vibe and color and temperature and texture, like all of those layers feel like very very aligned. Do you feel like you pull from anything specifically, or maybe it's just kind of bouncing around in your head and unintentionally it comes out?
So I'd say it's definitely the latter. I've played so many computer games and read so many
Mhm.
fantasy books that there's definitely inspiration from a mixed bag.
Mhm.
But there's definitely moments where I create something and then I'm like, wait, that's that. Then I can
I didn't
pinpoint it.
actually create
Yeah,
it.
but it feels like I have, and then I
Yeah, we've
realize I
all done
haven't.
that.
This, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I like that because then I can adjust it slightly to make it my own. But
Sure.
I'm like a good story is a good story. It doesn't matter where it comes from.
Right, right. And I mean, there are benefits to that too, right? I've talked about it before that like my brain does not like to visualize things very often, but if there's something that I can pull something that I've actually seen and use that to reference in my brain, that actually makes things easier for me. So somebody like me doesn't mind if you say, "Hey, you remember that scene in Lord of the Rings? It's just like that." And I go, "Oh, okay, now I can see it instead of trying to follow along blindly." Um, all right, so in terms of world building, what do you think your favorite part of world building is?
Now that's a tough question because I don't care about the world itself. I definitely care more about the story that I'm building.
Mhm.
So, for example, I don't tend to put random towns in my worlds unless it makes sense that that would be a place people would stop.
Mhm.
So it's kind of logical, but also it has to follow the story.
Mhm.
Um, and it does depend on what my characters do. So I tend to build a lot of it after the fact.
Mhm.
So like I said, I have the basis and I have an overarching path. But if they're
Mhm.
gonna turn left at this point, like then I need to come up with something for them going that way.
So your world building is kind of like a reactionary style to the story that's being created and told by your players.
Yes, which is why I really enjoy it because I also don't really know what's going to happen until it's happening,
Mhm.
which makes it quite exciting for me to enjoy it rather than rather than me telling the story for them to enjoy. It's experience and building the story together.
Right. Right. That is my favorite part of D&D is that it is collaborative storytelling. And even before I played D&D, I would occasionally, um, for nighttime, putting kids to bed, but just during the day, we would go back and forth and we would tell a story together. And I would start and I would say, half of a sentence or maybe two sentences, and then I'd pass it along to one of my kids and I'd make them continue on the story. And then they'd pass it along to another person and they'd continue on the story. So it's a game that I've played for forever, but in its essence, that is like you said, what you enjoy. It's 100% what I enjoy the most about D&D is that it's not my story, it's not your story, it's not whoever's story. It is our story together, and it does not function without all of us. There are cases where somebody dies and then either they continue on with a new character or they've exited for whatever personal reason. That's fine, and you can continue on, but it really does heavily revolve around every single person. And there are more vocal players, like, oh, I don't know, I couldn't, if I had to pull anybody out of a hat, it would be me. And then there are more quiet players, but every single player is still so important to that story, right? And I think that sometimes those shyer players feel like they don't contribute as much as vocal players, but every sentence, every piece of every sentence of that story is important, no matter how many words you add to it. You know what I mean? Um, I love that. So, for you personally, as a game master, what has been your biggest obstacle? You're not allowed to say scheduling issues.
Um, Biggest obstacle would be tying all the pieces together to so
Mm,
that it makes sense.
hmm.
So because my story is an evolving story based on what the players are doing, I have to have notes of particular interest so that when I go back and review, I can tie it into something that's happening later on based on what the players do.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that would be because otherwise it's just a load of nonsense story that you just ever going on and it
Hmm.
never really means anything,
Sure. Um,
which isn't
do
necessarily a bad thing. It's just nice to tie it into something.
Yeah. Did your players come to you with backstories to enable you to use those as marionette strings here and there and sprinkle into your story? Or is that something that they are continuing to build as they go?
A mix of both. So they had a relatively basic backstory, which is perfect because I can then tie that into the initial world I've built.
Hmm.
And then as they've made decisions and stuff's happened, let's say, so one of them's a dwarf. So let's say they go to a dwarven city. I can add things like, okay, this is your cousin. Like, this guy, you're friends with this guy, you've got a rivalry with this guy.
Hmm.
Quite quickly evolve that backstory and give them more to work with for roleplay.
So, as you've been doing this and gaining more traction and more experience as a dungeon master, do you find that you prefer that over being a player? Do you have a space in your heart for both? I mean, I feel like the answer to that is yes, but do you like being a dungeon master over a player? If so, why? If not, why not? Um, yeah, we'll start there.
Um, it's, I'd say I enjoy both. I think I enjoy being a DM more than being a player, just because where I'm running the show, essentially, I am forced into a position where I'm engaged 100% of the time.
Hmm.
Whereas as a player, I mean, you can always force yourself to be engaging, but um, it's very easy to sit back in the shadows while everyone else does their
Sure,
thing.
sure. Um, has there been any Hmm. Do you think that that's because you have so many things to think about?
In terms of sitting back as a player.
Well, I mean, either, particularly as a DM, though, you have so many things that you have to think about that you can't not stay engaged 100% of the time.
Yeah, exactly that. Like, there's so many things that can happen.
Mhm,
Um, for example, one of your players could do something simple like insult the bartender, but that could
mhm,
have massive consequences later down the line that they would never think of. But if
mhm.
you don't pay attention to these little details that could involve the story, then um, it's very easy to miss things like that.
Sure. Now, that brings up a question for me. We you and I, anybody who's played with me knows how much I love taking notes. So as a dungeon master, particularly in instances like that, do you have like a handy dandy notebook right by in case anybody does anything provocative like that, that you write it down, make special note to punish them with it? Whatever consequence later. Yeah.
Uh, you mean like a kill book?
Sure, something like something like that. You could call
No,
it a naughty list, whatever you
right.
words you wanna put on it.
Uh, no, I actually have very few notes. I have an eidetic memory,
Ugh.
so
Ugh.
yes, I
I'm
don't need
pained and
many
jealous
notes.
at the same time. You don't take any
I
notes.
I'll have, like, subtle notes to prompt my memory, but once my
Mhm.
memory is prompted, then I remember everything.
That's interesting to me. I don't think I'm completely, shocked by it, but it's interesting to me because you recently, for our Friendsgiving event, ran a one shot that was a murder mystery that was like 100 pages deep. And that seems right to me for somebody who puts that much work into the front end of it, that you would be somebody who also kind of take notes. But I guess if you're taking them mentally and you're just not writing it down, I don't know. I guess my brain just doesn't process it that way. Um, but I expected you to have some notes down for future reference as to how to torture your players.
No,
Good that it's
I
all just in
mean,
your steel vault of a memory.
yeah, the only reason I had so many pages for the murder mystery was just because that's me planning it out rather
Yep,
than me writing the notes. So I needed that to actually plan how everything interlocks.
yep. That's perfectly reasonable. Um, so in your journey so far, what has been the thing that you have been proudest of, or the most memorable moment for you so far? And that could be as a DM, that could be as a player, that could be two different questions, or it could be one answer for both of them. But the thing that has been either the most memorable for you or the proudest moment you've had so far.
So the proudest moment would be my murder mystery.
Hmm.
How well that came off, how well the players responded to it. Because I was really nervous because it was very complicated,
Hmm.
and I managed to run it. I thought I ran it really smoothly, um, and the players seemed to really enjoy it and really engage with it.
Yeah, it got
So that's
rave reviews for sure.
uh, yeah, which was and it dragged on a lot longer than I was expecting. But that's mainly because no matter how obvious something is, players will never look at it.
Hmm.
So that's definitely my proudest moment. Um, and then the thing that I'm enjoying the most is the character progression I have in Lee's campaign.
Hmm.
So because I we started out relatively low level.
Hmm.
Can't remember if we're level one to start with or not. Um, but the story for him has just evolved further and further, and he's slowly discovered more and more things over time, which has
Hmm.
been just fantastic to be a part of.
That's it's been it's been interesting to watch. The plot has definitely thickened, as it were. And We've talked about it before because I have joined in on that one, but I've also been in since the beginning on the one that Vancor was briefly transported to, met an amazing group of people. I will just remind you of, and then went back to his regularly scheduled Thursday campaign. But yeah, it's been even in the short amount of time that I have been involved in the Thursday campaign, I feel like I've seen a progression in Vancor, and I've mentioned it to you before. Um, I would absolutely agree with that. Especially, I mean, I can't speak from, level 1 or 2, 3, whatever you started at, but what are we at now? Level 7, 9? We could call it
20,
8
I
for
don't
fun.
know.
Our producer is saying that we are at level 9. I believe him because he's probably got it ready to go looked up right now. But yeah, level 9 sounds about right. Um, and I think maybe I came in at level 7, or you guys were transitioning from 6 to 7. So even in those couple of few levels, I've definitely seen a big transition in him. And honestly, from Lismer to now, right? From Lismer to Vancor, there's been huge progression and evolution in Liam the player for sure. So kudos to that. Um, in general, do you have any advice for our listeners? And I suppose you could go as broad as like eat vegetables every day, but I'm particularly asking about D&D, running games, how to organize or overcome fears or anything like that. What would be your piece of advice?
If you're struggling with creativity, um, try using ChatGPT just to give you some prompts
Mm-hmm.
and run with it.
Yep.
So, for example, I'll ask ChatGPT, like, give me a backstory for a fighter,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll give me a backstory. And it might be very generic, it might be very niche, but it gives you something to work off. That if
Mm-hmm.
you can't think of anything, to then add bits in and take bits away.
Yep. You're actually the second person to have mentioned that. I haven't checked it out yet. Actually, maybe even third person to have mentioned that to me. It sounds like it's a really good resource.
Yeah, I use it all the time, especially if you know what players are like when they walk into a bar and they're like, "Who's this person?" and it's NPC one. Like you can
Mm-hmm.
quickly grab a whole character backstory from ChatGPT and actually roll with it and
Mm-hmm.
keep that immersion going.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
I
then
love
that
that.
also can create interesting evolutions in the story as well that you didn't think to add.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great because, in the moment, I think that if you are fully immersed, you weren't distracted planning ahead for NPC one, who is always named Dave. We've come to find out, even if it's a lady, it's always Dave. But you haven't even planned ahead to give Dave a name other than Dave. Let alone, does Dave have a partner? Does Dave have kids? Is Dave a thug? Like whatever it is. So having something like that, a resource like that at hand, seems to be an invaluable tool for a lot of people. So, if our listeners haven't checked it out, it's now very highly recommended by several of our community's DMs. I will have to go and check it out as well. Um, out of curiosity, do you have a dice at hand? A D20? Anywhere around?
Uh, I can find one. I'm sure I've got one nearby somewhere.
You better. I mean, I don't. I've I've got one right here. I didn't even realize I had one right here. I've got another one right here. Apparently, I always have dice right here.
Are you a bit of a dice goblin?
Shh. I pretend like I'm not, but I think that my stash says otherwise.
What do you want?
I would like you to roll a d20.
I got 14.
14. That's all. That's how we're going to end our session. I'm going to let you think about what that 14 means for you in life in the new year. Do you have any modifiers that I need to consider?
Modifiers. Let's see. So I'm level 31. So what would my proficiency bonus be on that?
I ooh, 31. However, you are. of the male persuasion, so it's not going to be as high as a female's modifier at 31. It's going to have to be divided by 3. Do quick math. You're probably somewhere around like a -2 modifier. So it's really only a 12. It's all right. It's still above a 10, which is average. You're going to have a great new year. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Liam. It's pretty amazing that your company has given you this remarkable opportunity and that you've been able to bring the gift of this game to your coworkers. I'm really excited to hear more about how this all pans out as your team continues on their adventure. To all of you out there, thank you so much for listening. If any of you have a suggestion for someone we should interview, please drop us a line. From all of us here, we are so grateful you're here with us. Remember, be cool, kids. And if you can't be cool, be wicked. Until next time. Thanks, Liam.
Thank you.
Thank you to Kev G. Moore for providing the music for this series. Check out his links for YouTube, Spotify and Patreon in the links below. Wherever you found us today, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content, and if you want to find out more about what we do, how to support us, pick up some merch and find links to our friends like JB Media, visit us at wickedcoolkids.co.uk.